Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning to speak about natural gas as an option for resilient and flexible power systems in Latin America. This is the last of 4 dialogues held this year in preparation for the ECPA Ministerial. Prior dialogues focused on electric mobility, gender and energy, and resilience. The meeting is being webcast live, and the recording will be available later today on our website at ecpamericas.org. Again, that's ecpamericas.org. Interpretation in English and Spanish will be provided throughout the event. In September 2017, the Ministers of Energy of 25 nations in Latin America and the Caribbean met in Viña del Mar on the occasion of the 3rd ECPA Ministerial meeting. These energy leaders spoke about the actions taken by their respective governments to transition towards the use of affordable, diverse, and sustainable energy resources. While in Viña del Mar, Jamaica announced its decision to host the 4th ECPA Ministerial, scheduled to be held in Montego Bay on February 27 and 28, 2020. Since the announcement was made 2 years ago, the OAS has been working with Jamaica and with the member states of the Organization of American States to ascertain the issues that should be the focus of attention of the energy ministers when they gather in Montego Bay in a couple of months. Focal points from 26 countries participated in 2 preparatory meetings held in Miami in October of last year and San Jose in April of this year, with the objective of establishing the building blocks of a ministerial agenda that strikes at the heart of energy security, resilience, and sustainability. In addition to the preparatory meetings, the 9 members of the ECPA Steering Committee, and those members are Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States, met on 23 occasions between October 2017 and December 2019 to provide the advice of government experts in the planning of the ministerial. To facilitate private sector participation in the ministerial deliberations that will take place in Montego Bay, the OAS has partnered with the Americas Business Dialogue. The Americas Business Dialogue is a private sector-driven initiative aimed at fostering high-level dialogue amongst business and government leaders on priorities, challenges, and opportunities for the region's economic and social development. As a result of these thorough consultations, a number of thematic areas within the energy space, given the highest level of importance by the governments in the Americas, were identified. And these areas include efficiency, integration, resilience, gender, electric mobility, and natural gas, which is the topic for today's dialogue. Now, fossil fuels, especially oil and gas, have powered global economic development for more than 150 years and are currently the world's primary energy source. On the other hand, power systems are changing rapidly due to a confluence of technological, social, meteorological, and business drivers. These changes are highlighting the need for flexibility and resilience in energy systems. Against this backdrop, a new report by the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, explores the state of energy in 4 South American countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. And later today, NREL will share with us the highlights of this report, which seeks to help inform energy planning and policy options across the Americas, especially in countries with increasing variable renewable energy, as well as those that traditionally rely on hydropower. After the presentation of the report, a panel of experts will provide their perspectives and their views on natural gas in the 4 countries that were assessed by the report. So, With this in mind, I would like to turn it over to Mrs. Beth Urbanas. She's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Asian and American Affairs at the Office of International Affairs of the U.S. Department of Energy.
Good morning. Is everyone awake? Of course you are. It's Friday and it's raining in December. Anyway, but whenever I come to the Organization of American States, I think about sunshine and warmth and the wonderful people of the Americas. I think about Canada too, but we love the Canadians. But and if you're here, great. Important part of the OAS. I'm really very pleased to be here. And I really want to thank the Organization of American States, and in particular Juan Cruz and his team, for organizing and hosting this event under the ECPA Ministerial Series, and the earlier series as well, which we participated in. It's an extremely important issue, energy in the Americas. We have a unique opportunity in the Americas right now in terms of developing our own resources, whether that be variable renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, traditional hydropower, or developing hydrocarbons related energy sources. And right now, the Americas is really poised to become a major player in all of these areas as we expand the utilization of renewables in our countries, but also look at ways to make reliable energy systems possible in our countries by supplementing that with the utilization of things like natural gas. So it's a really important moment today. Before I came in, I got a petroleum economist email. Maybe you all don't get those, but we do. And one of the things they pointed out is that they are projecting that investments in Latin America are going to be some of the largest in the energy sector this coming year. So this is a really great moment for Latin America as they move towards accomplishing their environmental targets, but as they look at providing a sustainable, reliable sources of energy that can fuel the growth that is happening in Latin America. I also want to thank Jamaica for its leadership in hosting the 4th Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, or ECPA. ECPA is a really fantastic forum. We very, very strongly support it. In fact, the last time I was speaking at the OAS was at the rollout of Chile's ECPA year, which was the last host of ECPA. It's a really unique ministerial that allows all of our energy ministers to get together and talk about issues that are specific to our hemisphere. And there are a lot of issues that are specific to our hemisphere. We all deal with global issues, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other within the hemisphere itself. And so ECPA is a great platform for that. I just want to, point out that the region as a whole faces unique and complex energy challenges, and ECPA has provided a space to share regionally led solutions. For instance, earlier this year, my office partnered with the Organization of American States and ECPA to hold a workshop on powering critical infrastructure and microgrids in the Caribbean. It was a big success, really great conference. I think we all have a lot to share on this area. And actually, I am jealously also thinking about expanding this experience to the Pacific Islands, since I also cover Asia. But a lot of lessons learned. Experts from the Department of Energy, Sandia National Laboratories, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, who's here today, Jeff, as well as CARICOM, regional Caribbean energy leaders, they all shared insights on experiences following the 2017 hurricane season and the tools and technologies we are developing to improve energy system resilience in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. A lot of work still to do, though. Particularly in Puerto Rico. The United States looks forward to a robust ministerial in Montego Bay. And in advance of the ministerial, it's a real pleasure to be here today to announce the publication of the featured DOE-funded report by the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis, JISEA, and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory report, NREL. So just to mention what is NREL. NREL is one of our 17 national laboratories. I'm nice and I can talk about big picture things, and I do well with these little blah blah introductories. But the real meat and potatoes, as we would say, of the work that is done by the Department of Energy is done by our 17 national laboratories. They are the heart and soul of the organization. They're the good part. It's where all of our experts work. It's where we pioneer science and technology, and where we We work with the private sector and with academia and the public sector to try to make sure that the United States stays on the cutting edge in terms of science and also energy. So just, our laboratories and our funding for the laboratories is actually the largest funding that the United States government provides to science in the United States. So it's a really important part of our building, and it's a real pleasure to have folks from our laboratories here today, because they're the heart and soul of our institution. The report that we're going to talk about today is publicly available at the NREL website, and there's some copies out in front, which is really great. It provides an outlook of the electricity and natural gas sectors in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, and assesses some of the policy options to improve power system flexibility and reliability in these countries. In South America, providing affordable, NREL work closely with experts from the selected countries, and we are privileged to have an international panel to discuss and answer important questions raised by the NREL report. I'm looking forward to learning more about the region today from you all. I hope this information contained in the report will help the other countries in South America develop reliable, affordable, sustainable, and resilient electric systems, as most of them adapt to lower hydropower availability and rapid solar growth, and rapid growth in solar and wind, which Juan Cruz mentioned. We decided, my office is all sitting back there, Matt, Elena, Sandra, Sheila. We decided to fund this report because Latin America is critical to U.S. national security, prosperity, and energy security in particular. We're bound together through trade, mutual investments, and security ties, and maybe USMCA. We'll see how the votes go. We also worked on that, by the way, but lots of progress. The region, of course, as you all know, is richly endowed in natural resources, from conventional fuels such as oil and natural gas to renewable resources, which are increasingly being exploited in Latin America and North America. Argentina holds the second largest unconventional gas reserves in the world and is already a world leader in shale gas production, particularly from Vaca Muerta. Brazil is increasing production from the pre-salt reserves. They had their big auction not too long ago, their second one, and developing a new regulatory framework to create a competitive and transparent natural gas market. Colombia has untapped potential for shale gas production, and Brazil is a regional leader in wind and biomass. Chile has high-quality solar in the north and wind in the south. And these are all issues that we engage with these countries on, the OAS and ECPA, through all these different avenues to try to encourage the development of resilient systems with these countries, which is why we focused on them in the report. These nations and others in South America face serious challenges in competing for new investments in electricity and energy services, and various factors have slowed resource development, including lack of midstream infrastructure, which we hear a lot about, and a lack of capital and political and economic instabilities that challenge investment and make capital expensive. Let's focus on the issue of reliability and flexibility for a moment. In South America, providing affordable, reliable, and flexible power can be a challenge because of two main factors: the growing variability of hydropower supply associated with the El Nino and La Nino meteorological effects, and the rapid growth of variable renewable energy that is not dispatchable over short periods of time when renewable sources like wind and solar are not available. As you will hear from the authors of the NREL report in the next panel, natural gas is one of the options proposed to address the issue of flexibility, reliability, and increasing the resilience of electricity systems. The report provides an overview of the natural gas market and policy environment in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, and identifies the main challenges and barriers for natural gas development in these countries. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Logan and Josue Prado, the authors of the report from NREL, who are going to present the report to you and actually give you all the interesting facts. So, well, please welcome them up.
Thank you very much for those two wonderful introductions. First, I want to say thank you to Elena Berger and Sheila Moynihan at the Department of Energy, the Office of International Affairs, for supporting this work not only economically, but intellectually and emotionally as well. So we appreciate that. And their colleague, Sandra Dickinson, who worked very closely with Juan Cruz and his team here at OAS to make this event possible. We really appreciate that. And putting together an event like this is never as easy as you think it might be. So hats off to them. So we're here today, my colleague JISEA Prado from Colorado, and we're happy to leave the very cold and snowy weather in Colorado and come here to very cold and rainy weather. So we want to just spend about 30 minutes going over the very high-level findings from the report that we did. And you've heard from both of our introductory speakers what the general topic is here. And typically, when a national laboratory presents their findings, you will hear very jargony words like N-1 contingency reserves or probabilistic resource adequacy. We're going to avoid all of that technical stuff and, like the report, stay at a very high level so that this is accessible to everyone, at least as long as you have a doctorate degree in electrical engineering. So, kidding. Let me get the next slide here. The first slide you'll see here is the outline of what we're going to talk about today. And we've mentioned a little bit about NREL already. We have not talked about JISEA. Thank you very much. JISEA is the Joint Institute for Strategic Energy Analysis, and that's the organization within NREL that this work was conducted. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. But what I'm going to talk about is what is driving the changes that are occurring in power sectors around the world these days. And we're going to look specifically at the drivers of change in Latin American countries. And we often can talk about these issues in the terms of the need for greater flexibility. That means the ability of the power sector to respond not only in changes in demand, which has always historically been the case, but now changes in supply as well, and changes in business models, and all these other factors that are driving change in electricity systems around the world today. And I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in natural gas markets, but JISEA will have the difficult part in this presentation of talking about the country-specific analysis and summarizing the key findings, and then making some conclusions from all of this. So, as was noted, there are 17 national laboratories that the Department of Energy funds to do both basic and applied science and technology development related to energy. And NREL is the one in Colorado that you can see is the only laboratory that's dedicated to advancing energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. But each laboratory, at least originally, had its own mandate. So, for example, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory was created to address the technology needs for the nuclear legacy, how to clean up some of the nuclear waste that occurred over the decades. And the National Energy Technology Lab, and we have a representative here from that laboratory, Yvonne, who is joining us today. This laboratory deals more with advancing the efficiency and the reliability and the affordability of fossil energy sources. So each one had its own sort of mandate when it was established. They've often expanded or drifted and changed over time, but these are this is where a lot of the both basic and applied energy research happens these days. So NREL, just to give you some quick information about what we do there, when I joined NREL about 11 years ago, we had 800 employees, and today we're up to 2,300. So it's really changed a lot in the past 10 years. And the whole management structure, the technological capability, the infrastructure within our laboratory has adopted and changed very quickly. The one thing I'll note is that our laboratory is a living campus or a living experiment in zero energy buildings and batteries and the use of all these advanced energy technologies that we're seeing today. We have them and we're using them in our day-to-day lives on the campus. And we have tens of thousands of people who come each year just to see the facilities and how they work and how they might adopt them in their own places of work. So I noted earlier that JISEA is the small organization within NREL that actually conducted this work. And JISEA is a partnership between NREL and these universities that you see listed here on the bottom, the Colorado School of Mines, Colorado State University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Stanford, and the University of Colorado at Boulder. And JISEA's mandate is broader than what NREL typically does. I noted earlier that NREL works on energy efficiency and renewable energy, but there's also many other things that NREL does in advanced mobility and grid security and things like that. But JISEA looks at a systems-wide approach, and this report really is about system-wide issues in Latin American power sectors. So that's why JISEA is the organization that led this work. And JISEA has a lot of partners in the private sector and also a lot of affiliates. I won't go into a lot of detail there. I'll just note that some of the things that we work on include clean energy for industry and agriculture. And that's specifically, for example, in Colorado, there are a lot of oil and gas producers that want to be able to integrate more renewables into their production process. So we're working with them under the JISEA umbrella to figure out what opportunities there are to do that. We work on energy system integration and transformation, advanced manufacturing analysis, and this work includes, for example, critical materials. We all know that, for example, lithium-ion batteries and other advanced energy technologies often rely on critical materials that are only found in certain locations around the world. JISEA conducts cradle-to-grave analysis of some of these supply chain elements that are needed for advanced energy technology. And then finally, international collaboration and capacity building. And I think this is an example of that right here. This week, we had 3 researchers from Brazil who visited our laboratory, and we had a great exchange of information with them over some of the challenges that they're dealing with and how they're addressing them very creatively. And then we shared information about how we typically do things at our laboratory. So with that, let me just talk for a couple minutes about what is driving global power system transformation. We all know there are many, many changes happening in electricity sectors around the world, and there's many ways to describe it. Here we use the 3 Ds in the calculus of change in electricity sectors. One of them is decarbonization. And in some cases, that might mean using natural gas in place of coal. And certainly in the United States, natural gas has become much more affordable, and it has shifted the generation mix radically in the past 10 years or so. But in other countries, it might be that renewables are growing more rapidly, and that's the source of decarbonization. But certainly, for many countries, sustainability is an important issue, and they're creating policies and measures to make sure that they can cut as much carbon as possible. Digitization is another one of the drivers of change. And digitization not only means advanced communication and metering infrastructure, but greater interconnectivity of systems. And digitization by itself doesn't maybe do that much to change the electricity sector, but it can enable new business models. And that's what's really important, that you have so much entrepreneurial thinking going into new business models all around the world for electricity. And blockchain is only one example of that, but there's many others. And then a third example is decentralization, or the increasing use of distributed energy resources. And that could be anything from a small microturbine to small wind plants or rooftop PV, or many, many other examples. So these three things together are driving power system transformation. And they're creating the need for more flexibility in electricity systems. Flexibility can be achieved through market efficiency, reliability, and resiliency. These three things together, by focusing on them, can make sure that a system has enough flexibility so that if you have a lot of wind or solar and suddenly the output goes down, your system will be able to respond appropriately and keep the resiliency and the reliability there to make sure the systems run effectively. And flexibility is not just a minute-by-minute thing, or an hour-by-hour thing, or a year-by-year thing. It covers the whole range from sub-seconds to years. And each one of these time areas must be considered to provide enough flexibility to make sure your system is running effectively. So very briefly, here we have a set of four pictures of the generation mix in the 4 countries that we're looking at. And you can immediately see that, for example, Brazil and Colombia are the most reliant on hydropower, which is the blue area in these slides. And you can also see that Chile has a lot of coal in their system now. Almost half of their generation mix comes from coal. And Argentina has probably the most diverse generation mix, with a little bit of hydro, quite a bit of natural gas, a little bit of oil, and increasingly renewables. So we have highlighted on this chart some of the El Nino and La Nina events that have occurred over the past 10 years. And generally for the northern part of South America, the El Nino year is when you will see a drought. But for a La Nina year, the droughts will occur in the southern part of South America. So it's, you can kind of, by looking at these pictures, you can understand how that occurs. And my colleague, JISEA, will go over this in more detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it's very interesting just to look at the diversity in the generation mixes of these 4 countries. So the approach that we took, and this is my last slide, the approach that we took in this study, this is sort of the whole methodology behind the study. If you look at a country's generation mix, it has some hydropower, some variable renewable energy, and some thermal power. And each of these generation sources and systems have issues to deal with. And the question is, how do you ensure flexibility at different time scales? And so what we've structured the report around is these set of options in the electricity sector, and then these set of options in the natural gas sector. And I don't know how well you can read them. I'll just mention a couple of them. Diversifying your generation mix is one way to achieve greater flexibility. Demand-side management, including both energy efficiency and demand response. Storage systems, which in South America have traditionally been pumped hydro storage, but now increasingly today, electric batteries are becoming affordable and are one option that countries can follow. And then other things as well. And for the gas sector, you know, increasing your domestic production is an obvious way to allow more gas-fired generation, which is fully dispatchable and very, can ramp up very quickly and slow down very quickly to follow the variable renewables. That's one option. Having competitive and robust markets for gas is another. Expanding your pipeline infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that, but the whole report is structured around these sets of options to hopefully improve flexibility and provide the services that are needed in the electric power sector. And then, actually I lied, this is my final slide. We have two pictures here. One of the total amount of gas that's been consumed in these 4 countries. And you can see that the amount of gas used for generating electricity has risen rapidly, at least until the year 2014, when the El Nino peak occurred. And this is the share. This red line is the share of electricity generated from gas. And then we also see LNG imports for these countries, and that also peaked in the year 2014, but remains fairly high. How this will change going forward is an open question and something that hopefully what my colleague Josui discusses will shed some more light on. So with that, I'll stop, and Josui, can I invite you to come up here to talk about the country-specific information?
Thanks, Jeff. It's good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk a little bit more about our work at NREL and JISEA. So I'm originally from Brazil, so it's a great opportunity for me to. It was a great opportunity for me to work on this project, to learn a little bit more about my country and also other countries in South America. So we're going to go over some country-specific analysis, which includes an overview of the electricity sector in Argentina and Brazil and Chile and Colombia. We're going to discuss some drivers of the need for flexibility in those countries. And we're going to present some key policy options to enhance the flexibility. And we're going to conclude with a summary of findings. So we're going to compare each country, the main challenges, the main barriers, and the main needs. So let's start with Argentina. Argentina is a very interesting country. And among the countries studied in this report, it's the most dependent on thermal power generation. So you can see that about 60% of the total installed capacity in Argentina comes from thermal power generation. However, the country is facing a lot of challenges due to the aging infrastructure. So one example of the problems with the infrastructure is the massive blackout that happened in June of this year. And also the country is also struggling to direct investments in the electricity and natural gas sector. And this is mainly due to the shrinking economy, the high inflation, and the depreciating peso. So it's really hard for investors to invest in Argentina due to these a lot of economic instabilities. And also the country also had decades of market distortions associated with subsidies. And now, like the previous administration and this current administration are discussing some options to create some more efficient pricing mechanisms in the electricity sector and also in the natural gas sector. So here we show the installed capacity in Argentina in 2001, in 2008, and 2018, sorry. So you can see that in 2001, hydropower accounted for 41% of the total installed capacity. But in the last year, only 29%. And why? Why is that? So one of the reasons is that hydropower has a very high initial cost. So for an investor, it's a really high cost. It takes time, and there's a lot of license, a lot of environmental issues. So the investors decided to rely more on natural gas and other types of thermal power generation. So this is how the Argentinian government provides information related to installed capacity. It's not by source, but it's by technology. So for example, some of the combined cycle power plants, they can operate with different fuels, not just natural gas, but also fuel oil or gas oil. So, but the thermal power generation accounts for 65% of the total installed capacity. Here are some drivers of the need for flexibility in Argentina. So rainfall variability is a big driver. However, it's not that much compared to Brazil, Colombia, and Chile. This is because Argentina is located in the southern part of South America, so it's mostly affected by La Niña. So during La Niña, there is lower hydropower production. So here's one example in the Salto Grande reservoir, which is one of the biggest reservoirs in Argentina, during the La Niña of 2011 and 2012. So you can see how the hydropower generation decreased during this time. Another driver is the public opposition to hydropower plants, and this is in whole South America. The third one is the growing VRE integration. So you can see in this chart the VRE installed capacity in the last years, especially 2017, 18, and 19. You see how much it increased and why. This is due to the Renewable auctions, which are very well-designed auctions for wind and solar. So in these auctions, the investors have two types of guarantees. One guarantee is provided by the government, and the second guarantee, which is like a backup guarantee, is provided by the World Bank. So despite the economic instabilities, despite a lot of political issues going on in Argentina, investors, they can be sure that their investment will be good for the next year. So these renewable auctions are a very good reference for other countries, not only in South America, but in the world. And the other driver, the fourth one, is thermal power inflexibility. So some of the thermal power plants in Argentina are inflexible, especially the very old combined cycle power plants, and also fuel supply uncertainties. So you can see here in this figure that the share of thermal power generation in Argentina. So as you may know, Argentina faced a very serious natural gas crisis in 2004, and the country had to resort to other sources, for example, fuel oil and gas oil, to make up for the gas not available. So those are options that are very expensive, you know. So now with Vaca Muerta, Argentina is trying to get rid of this type of fuels, and now LNG is becoming very important, you know, to address these issues. And I'm going to show later how seasonal the natural gas demand in Argentina is. And here we're going to talk a little bit about Vaca Muerta. So Vaca Muerta is the big question mark in our report. It's very important, so everybody's talking about Vaca Muerta in South America, so I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So Vaca Muerta is located in the Neuquén region in Argentina and holds the world's second largest shale gas reserves, about 300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. However, less than 5% of its acreage has entered the development phase. So about 85,000 of wells can be drilled, but 1,000 were drilled so far. So it's very initial, but there's a lot of potential for sure. And one of the things that we discuss a lot in our report is the potential to supply not just Argentina's needs, but also to allow exports by pipeline and LNG. So there's other countries around Argentina that are looking Vaca Muerta very closely, because Argentina also has some ambitious plans to export LNG to Asia and other markets. But the big point here is that main challenges are attracting investments, not just in terms of production, but also the infrastructure to move the gas to the market. So Vaca Muerta is very similar to the Eagle Ford play in Texas. So in terms of technology, it's not really very challenging, but the problem here is infrastructure. Here are some policy options in the electricity sector in Argentina. So one is generation mix diversification. So the country is working to diversify its generation mix with other options. And in terms of natural gas variability, LNG is becoming a really good option for the country. So demand side management is another option. Energy efficiency, demand response mechanisms, especially to address reliability problems. So blackouts are not uncommon in Buenos Aires, especially during the summer. So good demand response mechanisms can help the country to avoid these issues. And also some storage systems and regional interconnections. DER, distributed energy resources, and effective pricing mechanisms, also to address the distortions related to subsidies. Some key policy options in the natural gas sector include investment in domestic production. So here we're talking about mostly Vaca Muerta. Pipeline infrastructure expansion to move the gas to market. Investments in underground storage to mitigate seasonal imbalances. So you can see here the production of natural gas in Argentina. So it's like a constant slope. However, the consumption is really seasonal. This is because there is a high demand for natural gas during the winter for heating, and during the summer, this demand is much lower. So the country needs to find its way to balance this production and consumption, and underground storage is a good option for that. And robust natural gas markets, so Argentina is working to create mechanisms to monetize Vaca Muerta, but it's very in the initial stages. And other options include import diversifications and flexible LNG contracts and technologies. And here, when we talk about LNG, Argentina is working on the consumption side, Argentina has used floating storage and regasification units to import LNG. And also, Argentina is looking to create some, or to adapt some technology in the production side. So this summer, Argentina had the first floating LNG unit in Latin America and started exporting to, it's a small amount, but they have big goals for the future. So in terms of technology, these floating options may be good for the production, also for the consumption side. So let's talk about Brazil, my home country. So Brazil is a very interesting country. It's dependent on hydropower. So you can see it's in 2018, 64% of the installed capacity came from hydropower. But in the last years, the country is really developing wind and solar resources. So wind accounted for 9% of the installed capacity in 2018. And Brazil has very sophisticated energy plan capabilities. So we hosted EPE this week at NREL, and they were showing us their tools and the methods that are trying to address flexibility and demand response and storage system, and it's really impressed. They are really interested in developing new tools and to develop some collaborations with other institutes to work really hard on this topic. So, and the country is also working to develop the pre-salt natural gas resources. So there's a huge potential. So there was an auction last month to monetize the pre-salt. And the country is also introducing some pricing reforms in the electricity and natural gas sectors. So in the electricity sector, Brazil is working to implement hourly spot prices. So right now the country has weekly spot prices, and this is not very good for flexibility, you know. So when you need to do your planning and actually in terms of market outcomes, the hourly prices will help the country to create price signals that are more granular, and they are more, they really reflect the cost of generation in a lower time scale. And also is introducing some natural gas reforms. So especially trying to reduce the power of Petrobras over production, transmission, and distribution of natural gas, and creating some competitive markets in the natural gas sector. Some of the drivers of the need for flexibility in Brazil, so we can talk a little bit about the rainfall variability. So in this chart, you can see how the El Niño of 2014 affected hydropower output in Brazil. So the red line is the long-term average since 1931, and the bars are for the year 2014. So you can see that during the El Niño in Brazil, so let me explain about how El Niño and La Niña affect Brazil. So during the El Niño, the north part of Brazil is really affected. So usually hydropower production goes down, but in the south it goes up. And during La Niña is the opposite. However, El Niño has more impact than La Nina. So, and most of the hydropower capacity in Brazil is in the north part of the country and in the center or the Midwest system. So El Nino is really a big problem in Brazil. Colombia is even worse, right? So, and you can see that, for example, when you have these very long droughts, Brazil has to dispatch thermal power plants that are very flexible. However, they have a very high cost. So you can see here how the spot prices in the Northeast region were affected when these thermal power plants have to be dispatched for long periods. So this is becoming an issue, especially in the north part of the country. So Brazil is facing public opposition to hydropower plants and great adoption of run-of-the-river power plants. So run-of-the-river power plants, they can provide some flexibility, but we're talking about short-term flexibility. Hours, days, or depending on the size of the reservoir, some weeks, but not for many years, like the big reservoirs that Brazil used to have in the past. And this is a big problem in the whole continent. And also, one of the reasons for the adoption of run-of-the-river configurations, they are easy to be constructed because the environmental impact is lower, and so most of the countries in South America are using this option to develop hydropower production. And the last point is the growing variable renewable energy integration, both centralized and distributed. So you can see the VRE installed capacity in Brazil in the last years. So in the last years, VRE accounted for more than 10% of the total installed capacity. And this number is expected to grow significantly in the next years. Here are some policy options in both the electricity sector and natural gas sectors in Brazil. So generation mix diversification, the country is really working in this direction, trying to integrate different types of generation. Brazil is, especially EPE, is developing a very nice plan studying different options, for example, geothermal potential in Brazil. What is the potential for geothermal development in the country? Also working with demand-side management, storage systems. So an auction is expected to be to happen next year for storage and demand-side management or demand response. So we're going to see how the country will integrate those mechanisms to provide more flexibility. And other options include distributed energy resources. So we had a lot of interesting discussions this week at NREL, talking about how to monetize, how to develop some pricing mechanisms for DER in Brazil. And the last point is effective pricing mechanisms. So one of the options that Brazil is working right now is hourly spot prices in the wholesale market, which will help a lot the country. Some policy options in the natural gas sector include investments in mass production. Here we're talking a lot about the pre-salt basins in Brazil, offshore pipeline infrastructure expansion, investments in underground storage, a robust and more competitive natural gas market, import diversifications, and flexible LNG contracts and technologies. So you can see how here how LNG is important for Brazil, especially in years of lower hydropower production. So it's a very good source of flexibility, especially with the flexible contracts and so on. So let's move to Chile. Chile is another very interesting country. Was one of the first countries in the world to liberalize and privatize its energy sector. And however, Chile, because of the natural gas crisis in Argentina in 2004, at that time Chile was importing a lot of natural gas from Argentina. So with the crisis, Argentina decided to prioritize the domestic market. So Chile has to resort to other sources for power generation, and one of the options was to develop coal power plants. So you can see that, for example, in the 2018, coal-fired power plants accounted for more than 20% of the installed capacity in the country. However, the country is committed to phase out coal generation by 2040. And this is really challenging. This is very good, but this is really challenging, especially in terms of flexibility. Chile has wind and solar energy potential. There is a lot of solar potential in the north part of the country, especially in the Atacama Desert, and has a lot of wind in the south. So, and the main challenge here is the geography. You know, the geography is really different because the country has more than 4,000 miles from north to south, but east to west is like less than 400. So this is really challenging to build infrastructure for both sectors, not just electricity, but the natural gas sector as well. And the country doesn't have sufficient gas reserves to be developed over the long term. So Chile will be an important importer of natural gas in the next years. And LNG is becoming a key option here. I'm going to show you later some information. So the two systems, SING and SIC, they were interconnected about 2 or 3 years ago, right? So the country now has the capability to better explore the complementarities between these two regions. And one of the problems in Chile is that the main consumption center is Santiago. So the main challenge is how to have a good infrastructure, for example, wind and solar, to provide electricity to the main load center, which is Santiago. And Argentina has the same problem with Buenos Aires. So this is really challenging. And also, there's another problem in Chile, that there's a high demand for the mining center, especially during the night. So there's a lot of sun during the day, but during the night, the demand is still high. So you have to provide electricity for those centers. So the interconnection of SIC and SINC was very important to address some of these issues. Some drivers are flexibility in Chile, the rainfall variability. So you can see here how the storage capacity in the main reservoirs in Chile. So Chile is facing a severe long-term drought that is affecting the hydropower production in the country. When you have this drought combined with La Niña, it gets really worse. So you can see how the different La Niñas affected the storage capacity in the main reservoirs in Chile. Another thing is the opposition to hydropower plants, and this is general in South America, and the adoption of the run-of-the-river configurations. So run-of-the-river power plants accounted for 36% of the total hydro-installed capacity in 28, but last year it was 68%. So it's a very significant number. Another driver is the growing VRE integration. So you can see here that this year, I believe more than 15% of the total installed capacity is wind and solar, which is very significant. And Chile needs to address the transmission infrastructure, especially when we talk about wind in the south and solar in the north. And also thermal powering flexibility is a big issue in Chile, especially because the country needs to rely on natural gas imports, so the country needs to really diversify its imports. Some of the options include generation mix diversification. So Chile is trying to diversify its generation mix and reduce the coal-fired generation, which is very important. Chile is working on a framework for distributed energy resources. Storage systems are very important, especially when we talk about wind and solar. So Chile is developing the first CSP, or concentrated solar power plant, in Latin America. And it's going to be start operation, I believe, in the next year. So in July it was 80% complete, and I believe next year will be in operation. So this is very good and very interesting for Latin America, and might be a reference for other countries as well. So another options include demand-side management, demand response, energy efficiency mechanisms, and effective pricing mechanisms. And some options in the natural gas sector include import diversification, so and flexible LNG contracts and technologies. So Chile is really investing in diversifying its natural gas portfolio, so by considering different types of import options. And finally, Colombia. So Colombia is another interesting country. In this report, we talk about a lot about the impacts of El Niño in Colombia. So I can say that Colombia is the most exposed to drought conditions in South America, especially in the El Niño years, because the country is located in the north part of South America, near the equator. So during the El Niño years, it's really hard for the energy planning people to schedule hydropower and do long-term planning. It's really hard to do long-term planning in Colombia because of the El Niño. So the country is a major exporter of coal. However, coal accounts just for 10% of the country's electricity generation mix. Like Argentina, Colombia is also working to rectify some market distortions associated with electricity subsidies. So the government is really trying to create a pricing mechanism that really reflects the cost for different types of customers. And the natural gas production is in decline. So Colombia has some reserves. However, it needs to find some way to produce gas, to attract more investments, and the demand is growing really fast. So it's really challenging for Colombia in terms of what to expect in the future. So the country is trying to develop its offshore resources, but it's a big importer of natural gas as well. So among the countries studying this report, Colombia is the only country that does not have a vibrant market for variable renewable energy. However, this situation might change in the future. So in this year, Colombia held its first successful VRE auction in late 2019. So, and the country is really trying to develop more solar, more wind in the future. So we can see here that among the countries studying this report, hydro still accounts for 68% of the installed capacity, which is a lot. But the country will need to find other sources of generation, especially for long-term planning. So it's very important for Colombia to diversify its generation mix. So some of the drivers of the need for flexibility in Colombia, so we can talk about the rainfall variability. So here I showed 3 different years. 2011 is a La Niña year. So during the La Niña year, you have higher hydropower production. The black line is a neutral year, no La Niña, no El Niño. So it's hydropower production like it's in the middle. And during the El Niño year, the hydropower production goes down. And this is really challenging for the country. So here we're talking about the capacity volume. And this is really interesting to compare different years, one El Niño, one neutral, and one La Niña. So the country is also facing opposition to hydropower development and greater adoption of run-of-rivers configuration. This is like general in South America, and the declining gas availability, as we mentioned before. And here you can see how the electricity spot price is affected when you have a lower hydropower production. Because hydropower is cheaper than other options, but when you have a really challenging year, so the spot prices go up, as you can see on the left-hand side of that figure. Some key policy options in the Colombia include generation mix, diversification. So I talked about the VRE auctions this summer. So Colombia contracted about 1,300 megawatt of wind and solar, which is very significant considering the had almost zero in the past. So this is very significant and might be a good starting point for future auctions. Another thing that I know that CREG, the Energy Regulating Agency in Colombia, XM, which is the electricity market operator, and the Ministry of Energy and Mines in Colombia are working on a framework for distributed resources. So we're talking about rooftop solar, we're talking about storage, we're talking about residential demand response, and also storage systems and regional interconnections. So Colombia is trying to be more interconnected in South America, and also they are working on a new transmission line with Panama. So this will be very interesting development in the next years. Other options include demand-side management, effective pricing mechanisms, and the reliability market to address some reliability issues that Colombia faces, especially in the summer. Some options in the natural gas sector include investments in domestic production. However, the country will import a lot of natural gas, is expected to import a lot of natural gas in the future. So one of the options here is to import diversification. And LNG is a good option because it's really flexible and the contracts are becoming shorter, so you can have a more negotiation power, and it's a very important option. And Colombia is working on a second LNG terminal in the next years. Here we summarize some of the risks and constraints for flexible power generation in these countries. So you can see that Brazil and Colombia have weather events affecting hydropower. The increasing adoption of run-of-the-river power plants, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia is high. Increasing VRE integration, Brazil and Chile are leading VRE development in South America. And when it comes to thermal power generation inflexibility, so Argentina, Chile, and Colombia have higher risks. And Argentina has fuel supply uncertainties, especially because the development of Vaca Muerta. So Vaca Muerta is a big question mark in South America. And here we summarize the main barriers and challenges for both electricity and natural gas development in these countries. So both, like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, have some transmission capacity limitations, public opposition to hydropower plants, and lack of market mechanisms to promote greater flexibility. So like more granular electricity prices, or even market mechanisms for flexibility, for ancillary services, and so on. And Argentina has some challenges and some barriers regarding its aging infrastructure, insufficient revenue for investment, especially due to the economic instabilities and the high inflation rates, and so on. And Chile and Colombia have limited international interconnections, so they're working to be more integrated in South America. And I believe there's a lot of opportunities for more integration in the energy sector in these countries. And Argentina and Chile face issues with demand concentration in specific regions, Buenos Aires and Santiago. Some of the barriers and challenges in the natural gas sector include technical economic challenges associated with domestic production, and these Brazil, because Brazil has the pre-salt. So, however, some areas of the pre-salt still have some high concentrations of CO2. So the country is really working hard to develop maybe some technologies to reduce the cost to remove the CO2 from the natural gas. So this is the only issue going on in the pre-salt, but we see a bright future for the pre-salt in Brazil. So the domestic production is expected to grow significantly in the next years. Chile has insufficient long-term domestic reserves, so it's going to be mostly an importer of natural gas in the future. All countries, they face lack of underground storage infrastructure, especially Argentina and Brazil, and they have some pipeline capacity limitations. And here we highlight that Argentina has insufficient revenue for investment. So we talk about inflation, we talk about the economic instability. So in order to develop Vaca Muerta and other resources, Argentina has to address this problem especially for investors. And the Renewable auction might be a good reference to be used in the natural gas sector. And here's some conclusions. I'm not going to read everything. I just want to highlight that all those countries have a lot of resources, have a lot of opportunities, have a lot of opportunities for collaboration. And so Vaca Muerta is the big question mark for us. So again, I'm looking forward to the discussions in a few minutes. And I also want to highlight that there's a lot of opportunities for international collaboration, and in terms of tools, in terms of governments to collaborate for solutions, in terms of flexibility, resiliency. And just want to highlight that there's many options in both sectors. So we addressed, for example, the natural gas sector. So there are a lot of options for better integration between electricity and natural gas sectors. So this report is really try to provide some options for those countries, not just in the electricity sector, but also how to better integrate electricity and natural gas sectors. So here we're talking about some policy options, and also we discuss some technical options. So how to consider, for example, the natural gas constraints in the market clearing process in the wholesale market, in the electricity wholesale market. So there's a lot of options available to better boost the natural gas market in those countries and provide greater flexibility and resiliency in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Chile. So you can check the full report, I believe is available in this link. So thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We are a little short on time, but we can take, Josue can take 1 or 2 questions, but then we have to move to the panel. No question? Excellent.
Okay.
Really clear.
Okay.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks. So, there were some copies of the report outside. I think we ran out. But there will be a link on the ECPA website to the report, and then I think you're providing also some, is there some information on your presentation about the link? Okay. Can we post this together with the documents of this meeting? So you will see all of this later today. The recording of the event, the link to the report, and the presentation. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite our expert panelists for our next session. If you can come up front and join me. I feel lonely here. So Tiago and Fabian, Lisa, and Ivan. Thank you. All right. Does anyone need interpretation devices? No? We're good? Okay. If you feel comfortable speaking Spanish, you can do so, and we'll have interpretation, and the rest of us will speak English. I would like to start with some introductions here. So we have, to my left, Tiago Ivanovsky Teixeira. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Brazil's Energy Research Enterprise, EPE, Empresa de Pesquisa Energética. EPE conducts energy sector studies and research at the behest of the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Brazil to support planning. And Tiago has been working with EPE for 11 years. He's responsible for power generation projects of all energy sources and works in technical and financial economic studies to support Brazil's federal energy policies. Fabian Barria, he is a Power Markets Unit Chief at the National Energy Commission of Chile. Fabian has 8 years of work experience in the energy sector, and he's experienced in this design and regulation of power markets, as well as the development of energy system regulations and public policies to promote flexible and sustainable energy systems. Lisa Visidi, she's Program Director for Energy and Climate Change and Extractive Industries at the Inter-American Dialogue since 2014. And Lisa specializes in Latin American energy issues and has written numerous reports and articles on energy policy and regulations, oil and gas markets, climate change, sustainable transport, social and environmental impacts of natural disasters development, and the geopolitics of energy in the region. And last but not least, we have Yvonne Peña Cabra, and she's an energy analyst at the National Energy Technology Laboratory. Her focus is on making electricity sectors more climate resilient, meeting a more active and larger demand, reducing their carbon intensity, and ensuring both affordability for consumers and revenue sufficiency for production and delivery related agents. In the US, she has worked for NREL, and in Colombia, she has worked with the Energy and Gas Regulatory Commission. Each panelist will have 7 to 9 minutes to react to NREL's presentation and give us their perspective on natural gas markets in the countries that were the object of the study, and if they may, and if they have some time, in the region. So, well, we'll start with Thiago.
Okay, you speak here or there?
No, you can speak from here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Juan. Initially, I have some notes that sometimes I'm going to read to my papers to be sure that I will not forget anything. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really thank for the ECPA, ONS, NREL, and DOE for inviting this opportunity to be here. I work at Energy Research Office. It's a public company, 100% public company, linked directly to the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and we are responsible for the planning, the energy planning of Brazil. So it's an integrated planning. When you know about, when you talk about natural gas, oil, biomass, electricity. So, and from the perspective of Brazil, Brazil is a very huge country. We are the biggest country of South America. No, it's not a competition, but it's just a fact. It's just a fact. And we have around more than 200 million people in Brazil, and our GDP, just for instance, is around $2 trillion. So I think we are the 8th economy of the world. And from the electricity sector, I think Josh has explained a lot. It was a really good presentation. I forgot to mention one thing. I really appreciate NREL to give this opportunity to EPE to participate in the report, this fantastic report. I really enjoy it, and I recommend to all you to download it and read everything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the electricity sector in Brazil. As Josh mentioned, we have almost 2/3, 65%. We are hydro. We used to be in the past, in the 90s, for example, more than almost 90% of hydro. So we were in a heaven because we had a lot of energy, a lot of capacity, and we had a lot of flexibility. Unfortunately, as also Josh mentioned, we are changing our matrix, mainly due to the social and environmental things to construct more reservoirs. And we see in the future, 10 years ahead, we had a plan that calls 10-year ahead plan. Is a plan of 2029. In 2029, we see hydro something around 50% of the matrix, so it goes down by 65 to 50. And the renewables, when you add wind and solar, goes from 10% to 20 or 25, something like that. And the natural gas also increases from 10 to 15%. We have also some nuclear, some coal. The biomass is also plays a fantastic role in Brazil. So, and we also have a little bit of oil that is being decommissioning in this time of in this time frame of 10 years. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I cannot lose my notes. Okay, and another thing I think it's very important to mention is that we have as a huge country, we also have a very huge electrical transmission system. We have almost 150,000 kilometers. When you get a map of Brazil, you can put the transmission map in Brazil inside of Europe, from almost from Moscow to Lisbon. So it's a very huge transmission system. And from the natural gas sector, as the NREL said, we have a huge potential, mainly due to the new discover and proven reserves of pre-salt. Pre-salt is in the coastal, okay. We also have some discoveries in the north side, in the countryside of Brazil. I think it's good to mention the volume, how the volume of the offer of natural gas in Brazil. Brazil have, in average, something around 100 million cubic meters. Sorry, I was having some problems with these units. So it's 100 million cubic meters in the production. Of this 100 million, 30% is reinjected in the oil production, and we have offered to the integrated gas pipeline something around 70 million cubic meters. And from this 70, 45 is national reserves. Something around 15 is from Bolivia. We have a huge gas pipeline that comes from Bolivia. And we have, in average, something around 10 million that comes through LNG regasification units. Why I'm saying all the time average? As Josh said, depending on the hydrological conditions to the rainfall, we need more gas or less gas. So 2014, as he showed us, we were dispatching every source that we had in the thermal. So the LNG that is average 10 million was working with more than 35 million. Just to give this aspect of the flexibility of the LNG terminals, okay? Our transportation in a gas side it's much less than the transmission lines. We have only almost 10,000 kilometers against 150,000 kilometers of transmission lines. So it's good to compare. And okay, in the next point is the power system flexibility. As I mentioned, we have this flexibility of hydro, because we still have a lot of existing reservoirs, and the flexibility of LNG. Of course, if we're talking about a low time flexibility, for example, seconds, minutes, some hours, the hydro makes this flexibility in Brazil. But if you're talking about seasonal flexibility, mainly due to some times that we have no rainfall, we must dispatch all the thermal generation that we have. So I think in the future, as we can see in the 10 years ahead, we have a huge challenge, because our hydro is getting down, the percentage of hydro. The renewables, mainly solar and wind, is getting up. And we're going to face some huge challenges that we can connect it to provide flexibility and some capacity to the system. And at least the last point, the points of the key policy that Josh has presented, the diversification of the matrix. As I mentioned, we are changing the less hydro, more renewables, more gas, less oil, and the planning is showing this in all of these studies that we make. The 10-year head plan. We also develop another study in Brazil that is long-term plan. It's a PNE 2050. So there are some elements for the future to the policy maker. From the demand side manager, they already said, we had 3 people from our team that was together with NREL this week. They really enjoyed the partnership. And I think we are developing an auction probably next year and trying to see how we can measure and how we can develop this demand side response, because we are also beginning next year the hourly prices. So it's important to connect these two sides, because if there is no hourly prices, it's very difficult to implement some demand side management. And the storage, as I mentioned, we have a lot of reservoirs is the cheapest way of storage energy, so we must use them. Of course, we have to develop natural gas storage, we have to develop LNG terminals, but let's go by the economic side and go first in the cheapest things, in the cheaper things. Finally, I think we must increase the pipeline infrastructure. This word is very difficult for me. Infrastructure, because we have only this 10,000 kilometers, so it's important to try to go to the inside of the country. If you take a map from Brazil, we have a huge pipeline that comes from Bolivia and a very huge pipeline on the coastal side. We don't have transportation pipelines of natural gas inside the country. This is a difficult challenge that we have. And the most important thing, in my opinion, is, as already Josh mentioned, we need an effective price mechanism from both sides, not only for energy, electricity, but also from the natural gas. And that's why the Brazilian government is working very hard in these two reforms. One reform is called New Gas Market. And I'm translating, okay, using Portuguese. And the other reform is the modernization of the electricity sector. And one of these key messages that we want to give to the public is this effective signals of price. This is very important to develop everything. So I think I passed through everything. Sorry, I don't know if I reached my time, so thank you very much, and I'm here available for some questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizations for inviting us. I'm working since 2014 at the National Energy Commission. What is the National Energy Commission? Is the regulatory agency of the energy sector in Chile, and I have some notes here also, but I have to use my phone, so sorry. Secondly, I want to highlight the strong quality of the report and to congratulate the team, and I repeat the recommendation that Tiago made in order to download it and read it fully. So I want to give just a little bit of context about Chile, maybe comment some measures that we are taking in order to improve the flexibility and that could help especially for the natural gas generators in Chile, and comment a little bit about our alternatives, because as you know, as the team mentioned before, Chile has no important gas reserves, some non-conventional gas reserves, but these are non-economically proved. So I think we are strongly work in natural gas in order to strengthen our integration with Argentina, but also in discovering and developing new ways of provide flexibility to the electricity system without natural gas. Okay, so despite our natural gas reserves are not important, we have some local production in the extreme south of Chile, which the weather I think is worse than here. It is in the Patagonian region, and most of the production there is consumed there. So the whole electricity system in Chile rely on imported fossil fuels, especially gas. There was a famous gas crisis in Argentina during, I think it started in 2004, and the worst part was in 2009, and we relied a lot on natural gas before. So I think we understood and we learned the importance of diversification in terms of our electrical system. Yeah. As a result of this crisis, we developed 2 LNG terminals in Chile in order to have access to the whole or world market in terms of LNG, and even we have export in some occasions gas to Argentina, which is a strange case of exporting what you don't have. And I think now with the initial development of Vaca Muerta shale gas production in Argentina, we have access to Argentinian market because we have pipelines to Argentina, and we are like the first customers for their available. So we have a really good price for shale gas. Yeah, for us, it's like half of the price of the LNG price for us, and now it's in a competitive level against the coal power plants. Okay, so it's like $3 to $5 the million BTU. Okay, and why is this important? Because as the report mentioned, we have committed a decarbonization policy. We have an agreement between the government and the generators in Chile in order not to build new coal power plants, and we have the plan to phase out all the coal power plants by 2035. This is a new change because it has been announced now in the COP25. Okay, and we are facing also, the report said, mega drought. I think since 2010. This is especially strong during the La Niña events. So we are working also in developing run-of-the-river power plants. But now, this month, the government launched a new law in order to facilitate the development of hydro reservoirs, because it's not just important for our electrical system. In Chile, the crisis is important also for the water consumption, yes, for cities, for agriculture. So it is really important for us, and despite of that, we have a strong opposition to the hydropower dams, okay? And the strong opposition in Chile is also important for transmission lines. So that's a big problem for us, okay? In terms of natural gas, we have been working in new standards for natural gas generators operation. Okay, as the generators used before the LNG terminals, it was typical that they could be some kind of inflexible power plants. Okay, and now we are working on that, and we are working also in developing and improving our system operation in terms of enhance the recognitions of costs for natural gas power plants or fast power plants. Okay, this is for example, in order to recognize the cycling cost for power plants, the start cost for power plants. So this is a really important plan for us, and the Ministry of Energy is going to launch a strategy for flexibility in the electrical system now in January, and it's going to be a plan for the next 3 years. Okay, and another important thing is that now in January 2020 is going to start a new ancillary services market in Chile. Most of the energy sector in Chile relies on, well, whole is in private actors, but the energy system is operated in terms of declared costs. It's not with offers like in other markets, I think in the US and in the South American markets also. We are more similar to Brazil in that. Yeah, but the new ancillary services market is based on offers, and we are introducing in that way the participation of energy storage and demand side projects also. So it's a really important step for us in terms of providing short-term flexibility for our system. In terms of long-term flexibility, we are working on giving a new signals of flexibility for our capacity payments. Our capacity payments is not a market in Chile. It's based on a administrative price that we in the National Energy Commissions calculate, in fact. And finally, in terms of alternatives, we have developed, we have introduced in our regulation, in our law, in our law, in 2016, the definition and the regulation for energy storage energy system. This is especially important because in 2016 and even now, there were lots of discussions about what to do with energy storage in terms of regulation. Okay, and we have batteries in our systems that helps to slow thermal power plants in order to give ancillary services. We have now the new complete CSP power plant that has just been complete in like 1 week ago that JISEA mentioned before, and we also have virtual dams projects that are now being developed that are even they include batteries into hydropower plants in order to develop or improve or enhance their regulation capacity. Okay, and with the ancillary services markets, we rely a part of the flexibility. We hope to rely a part of our flexibility in the demand side, which is not common in our system, and we are developing also in terms of distributed generation, especially in what we call net billing or small residential generation. Okay, and finally, we are strongly working with the Andean region and with Argentina for our international interconnections. We have plans for international interconnections with Peru, which is not here, and with Argentina, because we have just one international interconnection now with Argentina, but it's just used for security services. Okay, so I think this is the main context for us. This is our recent work in terms of flexibility, and I just want to hear your questions. Thank you.
Well, I also really want to thank the OAS and the DOE and NREL for the invitation to participate in this event. I think this is a really important discussion because clearly the old way of doing things, the old systems for power are not going to work anymore with the reliability on hydro that is not sustainable. With the introduction of variable renewable energies, there's really going to have to be a different way of looking at it. And natural gas imports or natural gas use is increasing, and I think this study gives us a much better understanding of what the role of natural gas is currently and a sense of what it will be in the future. So I just have 2 slides. So I mean, I think Argentina, we've seen this data in the other presentation, but I think the point here is that Argentina is different from the other countries because it's already much more reliant on natural gas, and it has been for a long time, and it's less reliant on hydro. And I think that the main issue for Argentina, it has sort of 2 priorities. One is in terms of energy security, the need to reduce reliance on natural gas, and in particular, reduce reliance on imports, which has been an energy security and reliability issue. And then at the same time, a big goal for the country is to start to increase more non-hydro sources of energy and diversify the matrix beyond natural gas and the other technologies that it uses so heavily right now. So, I mean, Argentina has kind of consumption and production in the country have really fluctuated. In the 90s, Argentina opened up, created market reforms, and started to see a big increase in production. And then under the 2 Kirchner administrations, production started to go down because of a lack of investment. And I think that that occurred not more than a result of energy policy specifically. Investment declined because of the broader macroeconomic conditions in the country. And I'll come back to what I think that means for the future. And I think that later with the Macri administration, there was an opening up, and we started to see an increase in production of natural gas, and we started to see a real development of Vaca Muerta to the point that it was producing significant quantities of natural gas. So I want to just show one other slide here. How do I get to the next? Thanks. So, I mean, as you can see here, conventional gas production is declining while unconventional production is increasing. And if the government has projections long term, we're going to continue to see this decline in conventional production and an increase in unconventional. And I think that's going to be a really important development. And so as a result, Argentina has started to reduce its reliance on imports. So as was mentioned, there's a real fluctuation in seasonal demand. In the winter, there's a lot of demand, especially for gas for heating, as well as electricity. And then there's a surplus. Now that we've seen an increase in production, Argentina has actually been able to start exporting in the winter months, and then in the summer, there's a real shortage. And I think that that's going to continue for a pretty long time, because you're going to see, there's going to be such a spike in demand in the winter that you're going to have to continue to import. And at the same time, there's been an increase in the use of non-conventional, non-hydro renewables as a result of the renewable energy auctions under Macri. And I think right now there's still a lot of challenges. So I think the main challenge, I would say there's still two main challenges. One is really infrastructure. In renewables, the transmission system is in very poor condition. I mean, the government actually was planning to hold another auction, which was going to be, I think, the fourth auction, and they had to turn it into what they called a mini auction, which would only rely on lower voltage transmission lines because they didn't have enough infrastructure to go with a high voltage renewable energy auction. So that problem is going to continue. And then in terms of natural gas, you have a similar situation where you don't have enough gas pipelines to bring gas from Vaca Muerta to the ports and to the main consumption centers. And so the Macri administration was planning to hold a tender to build new gas pipelines, and that's actually on hold. And I think that brings us to the second problem, which is the ability to get investment for all of this. And the country has very difficult investment conditions. Interest rates are very, very high, and so it's hard to get financing. So for renewable energy developers, getting access to finance, even with the guarantees that were mentioned under this program that they introduced, it's still a challenge. And even in the oil sector, I think major international oil companies are not facing difficulty getting loans because of high interest rates in Argentina. But you still have a whole ecosystem of suppliers, and if suppliers have difficulty getting loans at reasonable interest rates, the cost for suppliers is going to go up, and that's also something that's affecting investment in the Vaca Muerta. So I think looking ahead, obviously the big question is, will the policies that have been in place continue under the new government, or will there be changes? I think it's early to say definitively which direction things are going to go. With the oil and gas development, I think what we can look at is there's sort of my view is that there's sort of two opposing forces. So on the one hand, I think there's a lot of reason that Alberto Fernandez is going to want to develop the Vaca Muerta as well as the rest of the oil and gas sector. The country is not in the same, it's not in as strong a fiscal position as it was under Cristina Kirchner and Nestor Kirchner. So it's going to be a lot more difficult. We're not in the age of the commodities boom anymore, where there's a lot of fiscal kind of flexibility where you can offer high subsidies and the government can pay them. And so I think this government will be more constrained. I also think that he has made numerous comments publicly saying that he wants to develop Vaca Muerta. And I think if you look, even if the policies under Cristina were not, there were some real incentives introduced for natural gas, such as a guaranteed wellhead price. But I think on the other side, the real problem is the broader macroeconomic environment. And it's going to be very difficult for this government. Fernandez has promised to reduce inflation, which erodes increases in wages, which erodes people's standard of living. And there's a real need to strengthen the peso because the devaluation of the peso is really what's contributing to inflation. And I think that on the one hand, an influx of foreign investment from the natural gas sector is one of the easiest ways to bring in large amounts of foreign currency. But on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of pressure to introduce measures that are really going to help the population, such as, for example, capital controls that make it difficult for companies to get their repatriate profits and get dollars out of the economy. And so I think there'll also be a lot of pressure for introducing subsidies. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the macroeconomic side to introduce interventionist policies that are popular for the population, that may help the population in the short term, but that are going to reduce investment in the long term. So I think he's going to be facing kind of pressures on both sides, and it's difficult to say which directions things will go. He just announced his energy secretary, who doesn't have a lot of experience with oil and gas, but he did introduce the president of YPF, who is somebody who's known for having kind of a more moderate economic position. And so I think YPF is going to take a bigger role. And then in terms of renewables, just to conclude, I think it's also a little bit difficult to say where things will go. I don't think Alberto Fernandez has made a lot of comments on what he wants to do with renewables. And I think if Macri had continued, we would be able to say with more clarity, you know, probably these renewable energy auctions will continue. Now I think that's a little bit more up in the air. But there's still, again, a lot of reasons to go forward with it, to diversify the energy matrix. So I think most likely the new government will try to continue with this same approach of renewable energy auctions. But again, the broader economic context is what could make those, you know, could deter investment in the renewable sector as well. So I'll conclude there. Thank you.
I also have a couple of slides, and so again, thank you very much, Jeff and Josh, for your wonderful presentation and the wonderful report. I think it was great to have countries, like you can compare one country against another in one single report. It was very valuable. Like here? Okay. Can you? So I just really want to make 2 points about the Colombian sector. The first one is about natural gas, of course, and the second about electricity. So about natural gas, as Josh mentioned, domestic production is decreasing, and the reserves are estimated to be around 3.9 trillion cubic feet and last only for the next 10 years. There is also the expectation of tapping the offshore reserve that it's in the Caribbean Sea, as well as the shale gas reserve that is expected to be starting like next year. There's going to be a pilot to see what is the feasibility of that. Really like the development of the offshore reserve depend as well on the development of the transportation capacity to bring that natural gas to the country. So that is also a question mark in how that is going to happen. In terms of demand of natural gas, right now it's estimated around 1 gigabtu a day, but it's expected to increase at about 2.2% per year in the next years, mostly driven by the commercial, the residential, and the industrial sectors. Currently, the demand is met through the domestic production and through LNG imports that get the gas for 3 thermoelectrics. So LNG imports warranty the gas for 3 natural gas generators. For the second point, I just want to mention that about 70% of the capacity is hydro, and as it was highlighted, The 30% that is thermal, half of it is natural gas. The other half is between coal and diesel generators. The natural gas power plants, most of them have their natural gas warranted from the LNG terminal, or they have a dual fuel capability. So only about 20% of power generators, natural gas power generators, really depend on domestic production. Colombia expands the generation fleet through the cargo por confiabilidad, or the reliability charge. And more recently, it has put in place a renewable energy auction that just took place on October 22nd of this year and granted about 12,000 megawatt hour day of wind and solar generation. That is approximately 12% of the capacity of the country by 2022. So that's really a lot. About 70% of these projects are wind and 30% are solar. And this does not take into account projects that will be connecting without the auction. So at UPME, there is a list of projects, and there are much more projects than the ones that actually participated in the auction. So demand for electricity is really expected in the next few years. I don't see how natural gas power generators will depend more critically on domestic production. I think that in the next few years, what the country will see is more integration of renewable energy, and that the current domestic fleet will either grant more contracts with LNG terminals. The second one is expected to be in place by 2023. So either that way, or either with a dual fuel capability. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you for these presentations. And I was listening to each one of you, and we're talking about the same topic, but the perspectives are so different. And this really reflects what I heard from Josue earlier, where you're talking about the same resources, the same realities in terms of context, geopolitical context, but yet the landscapes in each country are so different, and the perspective vis-a-vis natural gas is different too. If anyone wants to pose a question to another panelist, feel free to do so. Don't be shy. But I do have some questions, and I also ask you in the audience, if you want to ask something, please do so. We're going to have a moment for questions from the audience. Tiago, I would like to know, I had some questions prepared, but you answered all my questions. However, you raised new ones. And I'm thinking, natural gas, Brazil and the Bolsonaro administration has been looking at this issue of pricing. Natural gas is kind of expensive-ish in Brazil. No, it is expensive, period. And so you did mention the pricing, and you mentioned two pieces of legislation, and I'm wondering if you can give us some more context and tell us more about it.
Okay, perfect. Just to remind one thing that I forgot to mention, that about the LNG regasification units that we have nowadays 3 is operational, and we have 2 more that's being built, and one of these 2 is going to begin the operation in this month. So it's going to be, we'll have the 4th one in the fleet. We can say a fleet of LNG regasification terminals. Okay, about these 2 initiatives that the government is doing. One is from the electrical side, electricity point of view. We are improving a lot of things in the market. Mainly is the hourly prices is going to begin next year, but for the compensation of money compensation, if I can say this, is going to be only in 2021. But it's a first step to trying to show the real price of the energy, because we were in a wonderland in the past, because the hydro made everything, and the price was a kind of, was a hidden price, something like that. And that's why if we're going to change in our matrix, it's very important to be very good effective prices. Another thing that we're doing in the modernization initiative is trying to begin a capacity mechanism similar to the Colombia, as you mentioned. There we call, in Portuguese, is a kind of a lastro en energy. Lastro means more or less the capacity of doing, deliver the energy up to certain conditions, depends of, it's not decided yet. We are working a lot in EPE for how to do it in Brazil. Another thing that is going into the modernization initiative is trying to eliminate a lot of barriers that has in the market to the investors to provide better conditions to investors. For example, if a thermal power plant goes to an auction, they have to sign a lot of documents. Okay, it's important to have a good project, but we are analyzing if if we are not asking too much. So we are trying to eliminate these barriers. There are a lot of things also in the distributed generation, and for the renewables, we're trying to change the contracts. And sorry about the time, but and from the natural gas perspective, we are trying. Petrobras used to be used to have the 90% of the market mainly, and 100% of the market of the transportation gas, and now Petrobras is decreasing the participation. It's also a government action to trying to provide to the market more, try to improve the market with more private sector. So Petrobras is selling a lot of issues from the regasification units, thermal power plants, capacity of the transporting in gas pipelines. And another thing it's important is trying to harmonizate the sector of natural gas and electricity, and this is a very tough challenge because electricity in Brazil wants flexible contracts. Natural gas in the whole world wants inflexible country. So these two types of things they must talk with each other to develop both of them. So this is a very good challenge. I'm personally working a lot in this challenge, and I think it's that. I try to answer. Sorry about.
No, it's a hard issue, and I think the last comment is so clear. You know, like how do you harmonize the two sectors? They're different, but they're in touch with each other clearly, especially when you talk about resilience of power systems. Fabian, I would like to know about Chile. I mean, Chile is like the good students. You know, they always do things right. Good policies, good right market signals. No, not really, they did. With renewables, that's the way it worked. And earlier we were listening about that solar, concentrated solar power plant in Atacama, in the Atacama Desert. There was an article in the Washington Post actually a couple of years ago about it, and it was called A Solar Saudi Arabia. And the interesting thing is that all these things are done by different administrations with different ideological positions, and yet they carry on with this work. It's like a state policy, and it's done right. So looking at natural gas, I'm wondering what are the right mixes of policy, or maybe not the right because it's a too broad of a question, but in the case of Chile, what really made the difference you know, in developing a less dependent energy sector, and that can be transpolated and implemented in the natural gas market in terms of policies, that is.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, if you see Chilean numbers, as you mentioned, most of our numbers maybe are the best in terms of economics. We have maybe the lowest inflation rate, maybe the lowest poverty rate, the highest GDP per capita maybe, but this I think you have to take into account when you see these numbers that it cover or mask a strong inequity in Chile. So since I think 2 months up to now, we have faced a strong social crisis with people telling us what are their expectancies about what the social development should be in terms of these numbers, okay, in relationship with these numbers. So it's not, in Chile, it's not just about social inequity, but you have to take into account also geographical inequity. As you saw in the picture, our geography is quite different or strange. We have 5,000 kilometers from the north to the south, that is like going from Iceland to Morocco in terms of European context, and it's the same in terms of weather conditions. Okay, so the northern part of Chile has the strongest radiation on Earth, so it is expected that we can develop solar power without so many measures behind. But which is not expected is how to take the best advantage of these technologies. So I think we are now developing strongly the distribution power sector, which has not been touched since the 80s. So we are trying to develop the sector in order to introduce more distributed energy resources. We have distributed energy resources, but we are strongly trying to rely more on that resources, and we are now trying to put into a correct state the ancillary services market also, and I think those two new regulations are going to be the most strong for the next 3 years. But as you mentioned, we have long-term strategies that we hope are not going to be fully changed with the new administrations. It is supposed that these strategies are built and are made with the whole private sector together with the public sector. So we hope that we are taking most of the technical opinions in Chile, and that the ideas could be changed because of the technological is always faster than the regulation. But we hope that the main strong ideas are not going to change in the future. Okay, so this is the way that I think since 2010 the energy sector is working in Chile in order to take all the opinions from the beginning. So you can, I think in that way you can expect that the policies could be in long-term policies.
Yeah, I think long-term policies is the key, which is a good segue to Argentina, because what are those long-term policies? I'm not going to ask you, Lisa, the question about macroeconomics, which is, I think, and everybody believes, the key issue for shale gas, and this is a bigger question which requires a bigger answer. But Argentina is the belle of the ball, and many countries are looking into those resources, and they want to be able to purchase that natural gas and then, you know, do business with Argentina. But it seems like Argentina is kind of stuck. There is this economic situation plus aging infrastructure. So I guess the question is there any perspective? You were mentioning those auctions that, well, obviously did not occur for new infrastructure in electricity, in gas. Is there any perspective with the Fernandez administration that this will still take place?
Well, I mean, I think I think that most likely the Fernandez administration will continue with trying to develop shale gas. I think right now you basically can't increase production much more until you have the pipeline infrastructure in place. So that's a high priority, and I think they will go forward with it. I think it's more, you know, right now companies are sort of waiting to see what happens. So I think under Cristina Fernandez, the first pilot projects for Vaca Muerta started under her administration. So there was some movement, but there was no really significant investment because the sense was this is too uncertain and the conditions just aren't good. It's also just generally much more expensive. You know, I think resource-wise, Vaca Muerta is very promising, but for companies that are, you know, are develop unconventionals, that, you know, specialize or are interested in unconventionals, the U.S. is competing. It's, you know, very cheap, extremely secure investment, huge amount of infrastructure already in place. The cost per well is so much lower still than in Argentina, even though it's gone down in Argentina. So it's, you know, they really have to compete for investment. And I think under Macri, we started to see really significant amounts. And that's why, as the graph showed, there was actually a real increase in production just in the last very few years. And now everybody is going to sort of wait. No new company is going to go into Argentina tomorrow until they have a sense that things are more secure. The ones that are already there, you know, they've already made the investments. They'll probably continue with what they're doing. But I think everybody will wait to see which direction it goes. And I mean, it's very hard to, you know, for me to try to predict. It's very hard because, you know, sometimes some governments seem, you know, are sort of more moderate in their economic policies, and then sometimes they, you know, go very far in terms of trying to redistribute wealth and control the economy, which ultimately, you know, has good intentions but ends up being detrimental to investment. And it's very hard to predict which way that will go. So that's why I just talked about the forces that I think are going in each direction. I think that we can talk about with some certainty, but saying which direction it will go, I think is very difficult.
Thank you, Lisa. And this takes me to Yvonne. I would like to ask you, you know, I look at Colombia and yes, they're looking at natural gas, and yes, they're doing the right thing in renewables. They're lowering their greenhouse gas emissions. But it seems that in terms of natural gas, the policy is kind of like undecided in a way. Like, yes, it's something we're embracing, but what do you think will be the future? I mean, is natural gas perceived as really a solution for greater resilience in the power sector, or is it something else that we do because we just diversify our resources? How do you feel about the future in Colombia of natural gas in general?
So with the 2 points that I raised, right, like from one side you see that domestic, like there's not a lot of gas in Colombia, right? There's a lot of coal, there's a lot of hydro, there is a lot of renewables coming in place. And so if you are a power generator and want to invest, you really look into the market and see what are your options. And so the thermal fleet right now, the natural gas power plants that right now exist, they do have warranted their natural gas in contracts with the LNG terminal, right? 3 of them. And then the others have dual fuel capabilities. And then only 20%, like TEPSA, is the only one that really depend on domestic production. So thinking on that, like I don't think the power sector is really the one that it's going to kind of pull the domestic production. Now, if you look to the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors, in the residential sector, there's a lot of propane use, right? And then in the industrial sector, 70% of the industrial sector is deregulated. It's not regulated demand, right? And so these are large refineries, large industries that they basically have their own gas, or they can move to a different fuel if they need to. So I don't think as well that they are the ones that will like, you know, pull also like that domestic production, right? And then I look into the offshore reserves, and then you see that you need significant infrastructure investments to build the transportation infrastructure. And that requires like long-term contracts that the power sector is not used to those long-term contracts. That's why there was this long-term auction for renewables. As much you see contracts of 3 years long. That is not enough to build a pipeline. So yeah, I think it's not through the power sector.
Yeah, no, it's clear. I would like to open it up to the audience if we have any questions. Okay, so we have 3 questions. We start with the ladies first, and then to the next person here. No? Yeah, okay, here. And, oh, I thought you were saying no. And then the gentleman here to the left, and then a gentleman below. I'll show you when we get there.
Okay. Thanks. And this has been awesome. Of course, I'm not biased about, but this has been a really good conversation. And I want to thank everyone on the panel, and I want to thank NREL too for their great presentation. So if you read, you know, a lot of energy press, we're going to be in a global gas glut any minute now. So we're going to have lots of gas all over the world, and gas prices are going to fall. And a lot of this is you can never predict exactly these things, or else we'd all be millionaires, billionaires. But what it is the case that more U.S. gas is going to be coming online and exported, whether that be through LNG or through Mexico through pipe, and then maybe LNG, or through Canada. And it is the case that Australian gas is going to increase in terms of its availability internationally. And then you've got Mozambique, you have obviously potential gas coming out of Vaca Muerta if the midstream gets built, you have potential pre-salt gas coming online. What impact do you think that will have on the countries that you all are talking about?
Okay, thank you for the question. In Brazil, mainly when we were talking about the thermal dispatch power plants, we have a cost-based dispatch. So there is a kind of a pass-through of the prices of the natural gas, international gas prices, through to the electricity tariff. So what I think it's from the planning perspective, it's very important, this link between international prices and electricity prices. Of course, if there is a higher prices from a moment, example, as we had in after Fukushima, LNG went to almost $20 per million BTU. The prices, the electricity price is going to be higher. We know that. But unfortunately, to develop more thermal power plants and to have more flexibility, more capacity in the system, it's important to make some arrangement. For example, this pass-through. I think this is a good option for the entrepreneur who invests in Brazil, and it takes the risk from it's one risk that he cannot manage, unfortunately. So we take the risk in the electricity tariff. So I think it's LNG is going to keep this important place in Brazil, this important role in Brazil, and we are almost receiving, just a number, I think in the last year, 30% of our LNG was from US, and we are thankful.
Okay, Chile now depends in 25% from imports from the U.S. Through our LNG terminals. Most of the LNG comes from Trinidad and Tobago. For us, are really good news. The more availability of natural gas, we have now natural gas power plants which are not being used in a proper form, maybe with really low power factor plants. And in the context of our recent announcements of decarbonization, the natural gas, we think it's a really important replacement for coal, especially in the short term. But even in the long term, it's going to be an important actor in our matrix. Most of the replacement now for coal is based on variable renewable energies, but this have important effects on the system operation. We expect to have, like, maybe are not big numbers for US or Brazil, but we expect now like a ramp in the afternoon when the sun goes down, like 600 megawatts per minute. That is really important for us, and we need more flexible thermal and fast power plants online at that time. So we are going to use more natural gas in our system for sure, because we hope to use less coal in our system. But I think it's in a the important is the comparison between the prices of the LNG market with the prices of the Argentinian gas. The Argentinian gas for us is really cheap, but it's because maybe we are I'm not sure if the only customer, but we are a really near customer there with pipelines and a early customer. So we expect that the natural gas contracts with Argentina, when Argentina have more access to the world market, are going to be maybe a little bit higher. So it's really important for us, the comparison in terms of prices. But for sure, as I mentioned before, now the Argentinian natural gas for us is really competitive, even cheaper than the coal in some times of the year. So we hope that the natural gas is going to be an important actor for us in terms of a more flexible and smart energy system in the future, and with less coal. Yeah.
Well, I'll answer for the four countries. I think the global LNG glut, or at least large amount of supply, has, I think, benefited all the countries. For the moment, all of them are importing LNG. And I think it especially benefits Brazil and Argentina because they import on the spot market. And spot market prices, I mean, I think Argentina was paying like $18 per million BTU 10 years ago, and prices have, I think, halved, since then. So especially the U.S., because it's more flexible supply, it's really affected the spot market. Countries like Chile that have long-term contracts aren't as sensitive to those changes. Now, Brazil and Argentina both have potential to increase gas supply a lot. So if they start to become exporters, then the competition is not going to benefit them. But for the moment, it's very beneficial.
Yeah, I think the same for Colombia. LNG imports are becoming more important. In 2023, the country will have the second LNG facility, LNG regasification terminal in the Pacific. The first is in Cartagena in the Caribbean. So right now we are importing LNG from the U.S. and from Trinidad and Tobago only, but in the future this is going to expand definitely.
Yes, thank you for this event. My name is Leopoldo Perez. I am with Leaders in Energy. It's a global community of leaders that scale up and also promotes clean energy and sustainable projects. So my first question is for Fabian. Fabian, I know since Chile has a huge stake of the matrix with coal, I'm wondering if Chile would, has thought and promote like longer PPAs to incentivize like the conversion from coal to LNG. I don't know if that is possible technologically speaking, but this could be something because it's this, even though LNG is like the transition fuel, you never know if it's going to be 10, 20, or 30 years, but nobody's going to convert plants if you don't have longer PPAs and you don't have stability, you haven't, a currency stable, all the things that, also Lisa talked about from Argentina. This is my first question. And also for Yvonne, Yvonne, can you give us an update on the interconnection with Panama and Colombia? I think it's very important. Now we have, this AES, a Colon, plant there, CCGT with a huge storage tank. And I don't know the economics on that, but there's a lot of gas from the United States. And I don't know if making one stop in Panama makes sense economically for the plants and in Colombia, but it's just a question.
Well, yeah, I will start with a very simple answer because I don't have the information for what is the status on, you mean gas interconnection between Panama? The TS? The transmission, the TS. Yeah, I know right now there is some exchanges with Ecuador. I'm not sure how much is right now in exchanging with Panama, to be honest. I'm sorry, I can follow up with you later, maybe. Yeah. Oh, right, yeah. It's yeah.
And it's good to know when this is going to be a reality or not.
Yeah.
I forgot the question. No. So, in Chile, coal is 20% of the total capacity, but if you see the generation is like 40% in some dry years. So, and it was a response of the natural gas crisis in 2008 mainly. So we have really old coal power plants even built by the government in the years before the liberalization, and we have a big amount of new coal power plants. Some of them are really good in technical terms, but are not really good for people living there. Okay, so what is our approach now is to create a special payment for coal power plants in order to recognize their costs for the commissioning. Okay, so it's a new capacity framework for them in order to have some strategic reserve, and they want to be on. They can be online in a couple of weeks if we need it, but we hope it's not necessary, and it is a transitory, it's a just temporary framework that is going to be, I think, during the next years. But for each plant is for 5 years. So you can have this new operational state in terms of capacity payment and in terms of dispatch, but it's just for 5 years, and then you are supposed to be offline. And this is the way in which we are trying to recognize the proper costs for being decommissioned, because some of these plants are really new and have not accomplished with their lifetimes. Yeah, well, that is the way, and we are approaching now the problem. Okay. We have been studying conversion even to art museums, like in the UK, but I think we have been studying in conversion to hydrogen, to synthetic gas, different plans, but are just in terms of pilots and not in a developed way. So the way now is to pay for go. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentations and also for the organization. My question will be related to Colombia. And since 2014, we have some incentives and benefits to renewable energy sources. And given the past action we have in October, and given that the energy prices were almost 50% below the average price in the market, my question will be, are we ready for like the competition in Colombia be among all the sources with no incentives, or shall we keep these incentives to this source of energy? Thank you.
So the incentives are like tax, I think it's tax credits and incentivos arancelarios, so, you know, importation credits. So those are particular to the hardware that you are you know, investing in. So like the solar panel that is arriving to the country, right? There is no other investment, any other incentive right now in Colombia for renewable energy. In fact, the renewable energy auction is showing that this is competitive, and it's already been competitive under that auction. So there is not such a thing as thinking, okay, since these power plants came to the system through an auction, then they had kind of an incentive. They did not. The only incentive is really for making imports just more available to the country and making it faster and having some strategic process to put the hardware inside the country. The auction was completely competitive. There were in total 23 projects, I believe, and 25 commercializers, so those that were representing the demand. And yes, the price was, the average was 95 pesos, 95.5 pesos per kilowatt hour, which means less than 30 cents dollar per kilowatt hour. And so these power plants will start generated in about 2 years with no incentive.
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias. Buenos días. Nos presentamos. Giovanni Ramírez, ¿entienden el español? Do you speak Spanish? Bueno, Giovanni Ramírez, embajador, representante alterno de la República Dominicana ante la OEA, y nos acompaña también el consejero Eduardo Cintrón. Y estamos presentes dándole apoyo aquí a esta, por la importancia que reviste esta actividad. En consecuencia, nosotros le damos la bienvenida y felicitamos este diálogo, tomando en cuenta, ¿verdad?, la repercusión que tiene la energía, el impacto que tiene el gas natural, ¿verdad?, tanto para la energía, para el desarrollo integral de nuestros países. Y yo recomendaría a los organizadores de este importante evento que si pudiéramos llevarlo al Consejo Permanente de la OEA, este diálogo, en una sesión extraordinaria sería maravillosa, porque no veo aquí, ¿verdad?, casi representaciones de las distintas misiones permanentes, y bueno, para los países nuestros es un tema bastante importante. En otro sentido, escuchaba decir que en la medida de que entraran, ¿verdad?, en funcionamiento al mercado los distintos países que tienen gas, eso impacta de manera positiva, ¿verdad?, en la economía, y porque va a surtir un impacto en los precios, va a bajar, y eso va a tener un efecto muy positivo en el desarrollo integral, como dije anteriormente. Si no mal escuché, Fabián se llama el chico que está en el centro, ¿verdad? Él decía que me pareció un elemento, no sé si fue que mal lo interpreté. Sabemos que por un asunto de ley económica, en la medida que hay mayor oferta, menor demanda, se deprimen los precios. No sé si fue que lo escuché mal, pero como que escuché que dijo que cuando entrara Argentina al mercado, ¿verdad?, entonces los precios podían aumentar, o no sé a qué se refirió que aumentaba. Gracias.
Okay. Can I ask you in English? Okay. Oh, en español, sí. No, lo que nos referíamos era a que la entrada de mayor disponibilidad de gas natural no convencional desde los Estados Unidos podría reflejar importantes bajas en el costo de la energía eléctrica en Chile. Sin perjuicio de que existen contratos de largo plazo en Chile firmados, estos son por 1 o 2 complejos de gas natural de centrales de ciclo combinado solamente. Gran parte de las centrales en Chile de gas natural no tienen contratos de largo plazo y están expuestas, por lo tanto, a los precios spot del mercado de oportunidad, que de hecho Chile ni siquiera está en las rutas principales, por lo tanto realmente es un mercado de oportunidad. Lo que dijimos es que en Chile el mercado del GNL entra en directa competencia con la disponibilidad de gas argentino y los precios que dicho mercado tiene, que hoy son precios muy bajos. Esos precios muy bajos eventualmente podrían aumentar si es que Argentina tiene acceso a a clientes más grandes o a clientes, pero ese trade-off, por supuesto, no lo podemos conocer hoy. Es solo un riesgo. También es esperable que los mayores clientes o clientes más grandes para Argentina impliquen mayor infraestructura y mayores eficiencias que no impliquen esos sobrecostos, ¿sí? Pero ese es el trade-off o la comparación nuestra. GNL de terminal contra gas argentino. Sí, sí. Gracias.
Gracias, embajador. Hablemos por el tema del Consejo Permanente. Yo creo que es un tema, le digo, hace 15 años que estoy a cargo de energía. Renovable siempre fue el foco del trabajo que hizo la OEA en energía, pero gas natural es un tema que está presente. Yo le puedo decir, hay 8 países por lo menos en la región que tienen algún nivel de producción de gas, y no digo que los 8 países son exportadores netos, porque no, pero que sí tienen altas reservas y que desarrollan el recurso y que tienen programado hacer mucho trabajo en este tema. Entonces, hablemoslo y veamos si para el año que viene es algún tema que podríamos abordar. Sí, adelante.
Gracias. Disculpa por tomar otra vez la palabra. Solamente para que tenga un efecto bastante positivo y acogedor para los países que integramos el Consejo Permanente y para la Presidencia, déle un enfoque al planteamiento del punto de vista, el impacto que tiene el punto de vista del desarrollo y el impacto económico y medioambiental. Yo creo que para que la propuesta sea muy atractiva y ya en la próxima presidencia que entra a partir del 1 de enero, entonces ya estemos desarrollando un consejo permanente extraordinario para este importante tema. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a usted, embajador. And that's all the time we've got. I would like to do some conclusions, and I'm going to ask each one of you to give us 60 seconds, and I really emphasize on the 60 seconds. For me, you know, I think there is a great future for natural gas, and the projections are very positive. And if you look at the level of investment, what the efforts that countries are doing, and how this resource is compatible with a greater resilience in systems and with NDCs, to be quite frank. I mean, many countries are using this resource as a way to address these issues as well. I see a great future and a projection of at least 20 or 30 years, if not more. I don't see natural gas as a bridge fuel. I see natural gas as one of the resources that will be part of the energy mix in the Americas for at least 30 or maybe even more years, but I'm not going to say more years because we know what that does to markets, so let's keep it at 20 or 30 years.
Okay, starting the chronometer. I really thank you again for the invitation. It was really exciting for me to be here. I hope that I could explain a little bit about Brazil's sectors, Brazilian energy sector. Sorry about some English mistakes, but it happens. It's importation. It's It's how to communicate, and I think the communication was not breakdown. I think it's the last words is Brazil is working hard in these two initiatives of the government, trying to motivate the market, try to increase the market with better signals, more investments, more money, more social development in Brazil. And we expect with all of these works, even considering all the difficulties in this job, to achieve the best possible results and try to brighter the energy in South America. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank again for the invitation. Secondly, my apologies for some English mistakes. It's the English of a Latin living in Latin America. Thirdly, I want to refer to some extra analysis, maybe, or further analysis. I think maybe it's going to be important to expand the approach now, because the report is really, really good, to the cross-sectoral analysis. Maybe I think Thiago mentioned before, but I think it's really important for us. It's not a focus that we use a lot in Latin America, and we almost analyze the electrical sector, the fuel sectors, but it's really not common to realize analysis together. So I think it's really important for us, because in Chile, for instance, we have lots high pollution levels in winter due to firing wood. It's raw. It just that is the reason, and it's an important demand that is not considered in the natural gas market usually. So I think this is an important approach, and the other one is to have an inter-regional or Latin American context about the regulatory and market framework for local markets. Yeah, and this is maybe an important step that we have to do, or we have to make, in order to understand better what are the opportunities for the local markets and for the Latin American market in the connection with the US, for instance. Okay, thank you.
Well, I would just conclude by saying that I think for Argentina, what it does with the natural gas sector is going to be extremely important for the economy. The country has a history of blackouts, which is really detrimental to economic productivity. And at the same time, the ability to create more domestic supply is really going to help. Ultimately, it's extremely important to eliminate the subsidies that they have for electricity and for natural gas for end consumers. And so I think that what they do with their domestic supply is going to help them to address that problem. And the report goes into a lot more detail about this, so it really provides an excellent kind of analysis of what's happening. And I also want to congratulate ECPA for this series, because I've seen that you've really highlighted in these dialogues, the really key issues that are most important to the region. So really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. Thank you.
And I think the conclusion for Colombia, it's talking a little bit about that cross-discipline or cross-sector analysis, that I don't think the power sector is the sector that will drive domestic production of natural gas in Colombia. I think the power sector of Colombia is very resilient, and that the sector has shown to be able to cope with very long Niños, and more frequently Niños, actually. The last was just last year, and they are expecting probably in the next few months there is one warning that there might be another Niño coming. So before we were talking about 5 years, now it's every couple of years. So the country has shown that their power sector is really resilient, and it's been able to cope with El Niño. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all. Please join me in a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you, and a pleasure to host these events, and I hope to see many of you in Montego Bay next year for the Ministerial. Thank you.